好，接下来呢，我们今天要访问的这位来宾呢，是他曾经是老布希的文胆啊，他曾经是这个老布希的演讲稿的撰写人啊，他当然就是他是美国的一个非常知名的右翼的一个评论员。好，现在我们就开始呢进行这段访问。Michael Jones is an American commentator, policy analyst, writer, a former speechwriter for President Senior George Bush, and a leader and spokesman in the Tea Party movement. He was also a healthcare executive. Hello, Michael. How are you?
Hello. Nice to be back with you guys. Thank you.
Okay. Is there anything I need to introduce you or missing something?
It's a life of many developments and many affiliations, but we're living in the present tense, in my view. I mean, when I go back and look at, a lot of these 20th century affiliations, even though it's not comparatively that long ago, the world's changed so much, and what we're confronting and the risks, challenges, and opportunities that I think we confront. It's present and future tense has got to be the focus,
Okay. Okay, my background is I graduated from the University of Wisconsin-Madison in 1995 with a PhD degree in journalism and mass communication, and was a professor and now a fugitive. Okay,
well, that's a pretty progressive university that you have there. I kind of think Berkeley and Wisconsin-Madison are kind of like out there as far as being pioneers in the progressive ideology of American academia.
Yeah, thank you. I love Wisconsin. I love the Badger, Wisconsin state animal. Yeah, we call Badger. Yeah, I love that place. I think it's my second hometown, I think. Okay, let me start today's interview. In 2019, Taiwan's ruling party capitalized on protests in Hong Kong and used the term Hong Kong today, Taiwan tomorrow to instill public fears and win a presidential election. Now, with Russia invading Ukraine, the slogan, Ukraine today, Taiwan tomorrow, again, has emerged in Taiwan. What do you think about such rhetoric?
Well, it's certainly sounding the alarm, and the alarm needs to be sounded. So on that level, I find I'm very agreeable with it. I do think we need to speak to the aspirations of people. And particularly in the case of Taiwan, my extensive experience is to continue to reiterate the value of freedom, both political and economic. And by the way, on both fronts, Taiwan is a leader in the world in political and economic freedom. Ranking it. In fact, as a foreign policy analyst there at the foundation, if you look at the ranking on Taiwan, it's just about as high as it's ever been in the almost 30 years that they've put out the index of economic freedom. These things really matter. And then you obviously, on the other hand, look at the mainland and the fact that you have now a definitionally genocidal regime engaged in vast suppression of every one of its provinces, not just Xinjiang or East Turkestan, as the Uyghurs call it. And that has got clear culpability on this pandemic, and it's a tyranny. And I think we've been really slow to kind of define this regime in the way that it is. I mean, you have the largest country by population in the world, 1.4 billion people, governed by a Politburo of a few dozen, and then a super Politburo of, roughly 12. And the idea that you would have 1.4 billion people governed by 12 people who none of those 1.4 billion ever voted for, never elected, and that the government has no accountability for, and that they would have singular control over the politics, the legal system of the country, the military of the country. No component of anything in China that is not controlled by China's Communist Party is not a future that Taiwan wants to be a part of. So part of the rhetorical approach to this is, yes, every citizen of Taiwan needs to be consciously aware that the threat of military aggression or of even vast political and economic and other pressures is really real. But Taiwan should also be reminded that unlike China's Communist Party, that really it's trying to forge some relationships now with some other similarly tyrannical regimes, has no real friends. Taiwan does have real friends, and the United States is one of them.
Okay. Okay. In his State of the Union address 2 weeks ago, President Joe Biden stressed that the United States and its allies will defend every inch of NATO territory, but that it will not send troops to fight in Ukraine. Currently, Taiwan is not part of the U.S. military alliance, and the U.S.-Taiwan Relation Act only authorizes to the United States government to provide Taiwan with their defensive weapons. Do you think that if China invades Taiwan, Taiwan will have to fight along like Ukraine, and that the United States and Western countries will not send any troops to Taiwan to support Taiwan?
Well, firstly, on Biden's comments, I mean, there's what's called Article 5 of the NATO founding document that is a binding agreement between all member nations of NATO that we would come to the defense of any country that is attacked. That's been a bit controversial, but it's also put real beef and meaning into NATO as a real alliance. And of course, it's only been used once, and that was after 9/11, when the United States was attacked by Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden. So NATO pretty quickly activated Article 5. Ukraine is not a member of NATO. And, you know, from a policy standpoint, we have the benefit, also being in a free country here in the United States, of being kind of objective and critical about even our own government. You know, I think it was, there were some mistakes made by the Biden administration and the Obama administration before it, and a lot of, I think, heads of state in NATO to give Ukraine the impression that we would go to war in the event that they were invaded by Putin, which was, it's always been, you know, a concern. And realize, which I don't think many do, the Russian troop presence on the Ukraine border, which ultimately built up to 190,000, was at 100,000 last spring. So they've been there for quite a long time. And I just don't believe that this administration, as they didn't in Afghanistan, handled it quite correctly. One thing they did was they, you know, dispensed very high-level officials to talk with the Russian government without first demanding that they, you know, move these troops off the border. But let's be honest. I mean, they're now facing a much greater magnitude of resistance than I think they envisioned, than Putin envisioned. And importantly, the US, while we're not sending US soldiers or US military to fight on the ground in Ukraine, we are providing a lethal aid, as the Trump administration did before, to assist Ukraine in defending itself. And this does not look like they are going to come to the sort of speedy military victory that I believe Putin felt that he would obtain. I think he thought that the Ukrainians would lay down, that there wasn't a sufficient alliance to sovereignty or to that government, and he miscalculated on that. The other thing important, and it's very important that Taiwan realize this, is I'm very confused why there's any speculation about where Xi Jinping and China's Communist Party has stood on this issue. February 4th, as the Olympics launched in Beijing, Vladimir Putin flew to Beijing and met with Xi Jinping and issued a pretty voluminous agreement on a broad range of topics. some of them are absurd with them, with these adjectives committing to democracy and human rights and, things that they're the biggest egregious violators of in the world. But, they opposed NATO expansion, and it was clearly a very anti-American and anti-freedom document. And there's Putin, Xi Jinping agreed to purchase, I think, 100 million tons of coal. I haven't heard any announcement from the CCP that they have opted out of that. And importantly, Xi Jinping told Putin to wait till the Winter Olympics were over until he actually launched the military assault on Ukraine. So if you ask, what is the position when Putin said, hey, we're going to send, this 190,000 troop force into Ukraine and basically steamroll it and try to secure it. Xi Jinping didn't say, no, don't do that. Xi Jinping said, would you mind waiting until after the Olympics? So in a way, he greenlighted it. I have no doubt about it. And then you can look at the United Nations General Assembly vote where, they had a very straightforward resolution. And oftentimes these UN resolutions are not all that straightforward, which it can lead some countries to either abstain or vote against it based on some component of it. This was simply two components to the UN Assembly vote. And that was, number one, condemning Putin for the military aggression on Ukraine, and number two, calling on them to retreat and remove their illegal occupation and military activities in the country, in Ukraine, and to return to Russia. Now, I don't really understand how any country in the world would not be immediately supportive of that, but China abstained on it. So I believe one of the great risks right now is sort of like 1940, as the Axis powers of Italy, Japan, and Nazi Germany began to formalize a relationship, which really definitionally made the war literally a world war. I'm concerned with what I would say is China's relationship with North Korea, Russia, Iran, particularly, which is strengthening, and now with Russia based on the agreement that they forged. And you just have to reiterate, as hopefully the message is getting through, that this is a regime in Xi Jinping and with every one of his predecessors that has been among the most murderous and human rights violating and democracy suffocating and disrespectful and illegally functioning of any in the world and in the history of the world. And in fact, if you look just on the basis, we talk about the 100 million innocents lost to communism since the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917, the vast lion's share of those have been by China's Communist Party. So this is, often described by China hawks in the United States as a transnational criminal organization. And I think the first time I heard that, I kind of said, is that, but you think about it, and it's like all of their wealth has either been stolen or a product of violating, various trade agreements or illegal, literally criminal behavior, like organ sales and human organ sales, fentanyl sales. It's really, to the extent the Soviet Union was an evil empire, this too is an evil empire. And I think that message hasn't gotten through, and it's not, and to China's credit, I mean, they've been very effective in sort of putting forward a smiling face to the world as they have conducted, this bloodthirsty steamrolling of individual rights, liberties, and even human life.
Mm-hmm. Okay, currently Taiwan young men must undergo 4 months of military training. Do you think it is necessary for Taiwan to revert to a 2-year conscription model?
Well, when I think about just the population terms, so I mentioned the most populous nation in the world is China, 1.4 billion. I think Taiwan, last I checked, is about 23 million. Is that still roughly about right? So you look at the disproportionate percentage of personnel, and which also gravitates into the armed forces, where the PLA is now the largest standing army. I mean, literally several million Chinese under arms in the PLA. I think you might look, I'm just offering a suggestion, at what, say, Israel's program. Israel has 2.5 years for men, I believe, and 2 years for women. And that's the other consideration is, should the opportunity of military service be made available to Taiwanese women? I would never be presumptuous enough to say, yes, you need to do that, or no, absolutely don't do that. But let me just say this. I think at this definitional moment, if it ends up being supportive and helpful, and it's in the view of Taiwanese and allied, guidance, that it's helpful to the defense, then it's something to consider. But I think the answer to your question is, look, 4 months. It's almost like you're done through training, getting physically ready, mentally ready, learning your function, and then you're gone. I mean, it's really that 5th, 6th, 7th month, you're much more valuable within the military than you were, say, on day one, where you're not prepared at all. I think it seems brief, given the magnitude of the threat that I believe Taiwan and the world confront with the CCP's aggression. For some, Golda Meir, who I think was the 4th prime minister of Israel, had said, when a man says he's going to kill you, trust that he's going to kill you. For some reason, we have Xi Jinping talking about, breaking skulls and I mean, you get some of this vicious rhetoric, and it just simply never gets either reported or taken seriously, or we kind of discount it. I would take it seriously, and I don't see any reason, based on this man's behavior in his own country or around the world, that we shouldn't take him seriously about his stated objective of reuniting Taiwan through force or other means.
Okay, many scholars believe that Russia's current invasion into Ukraine is the result of NATO's continuous expansion toward the east after the Cold War. If Ukraine joins NATO, would it be more comparable to the threat the Soviet Union posed to the United States when it threatened to set a missile in Cuba in 1962? What do you think about such an analysis?
Well, I feel that I don't believe we should include Ukraine in NATO. And as I referenced earlier, I think even the rhetorical, hypothetical discussion of it was provocative, but it ultimately raises this question that we consider maybe too much. And that is, will our words or our acts be deemed provocative? I joke with people that in Western reporting, you'll often hear the phrase, in a move likely to anger Beijing, followed by whatever the West had done. We're beyond that, aren't we? I mean, I think we're dealing with a regime that, however we act and whatever we say, has a clear strategic plan that it's executing on, with the Belt and Road Initiative, with its human rights suppressions domestically, with its aspirations to control not just Taiwan, but all of the South China Sea, and a very sizable percentage of global trade through that region, and to supplant the United States as leader of the world in all respects. My position, and I believe it must be the position of all free nations and free people, is that we will go to any length to ensure that that does not occur.
Okay, do you approve the Biden administration's response to the Putin's invasion of Ukraine?
Well, no, because I feel rhetorically that there never should have been any suggestion that we were going to include Ukraine in NATO. I think whether or not Putin found that provocative, I can't say, but it sort of gave him some sort of domestic excuse for what is an inexcusable act of military aggression against the people of Ukraine. And then I felt that the nature of the negotiations were premature, as I mentioned. They should have been conditions on any of those. And then most importantly, when it comes to the sanctions that we imposed, there's a science to this. I mean, we act like these are just all opinions, but effectual sanctions you would have started by ending or at least suspending it, the purchase of all energy exports from Russia, including petroleum, which is their largest export. He didn't do that. And we were only buying Russian oil because of the domestic regulatory constraints that he's placed on our own US production. If you might recall, during the Trump administration, for the first time in a long time, many decades, we became a net exporter of energy. We have more than enough petroleum and natural gas available in the United States that we do not need and should not be relying on any foreign country, much less a hostile foreign country, for the provision of it. And Europe's made that same mistake, particularly Germany, with their reliance on the pipeline. So then additionally, when you look at the sanctions that he did impose, including removing Russian banks from the SWIFT system of the international banking system, and the sanctions that he placed on most of the major banking institutions, common sense, economics 101 is that you're going to lead to a decimation of the ruble. And sure enough, there's been like a 40% plus correction negatively in the ruble. He's imposed limits on the amount of withdrawals from Russian banks because people are understandably panicking. That sanction, to me, is one that is very disruptive from the standpoint of the domestic stability of Russia. So you're kind of inviting revolt against Putin. And I thought we had learned in Iraq and in Iran and Nicaragua and Cuba before that if you're going to pursue regime change, you better have a clear idea of what's going to come next. Yet this administration seems almost recklessly gleeful that there's a possibility of Putin's fall. Don't know if that'll happen or won't happen, but I would say this, that you do not create conditions where you're going to have a change of government, particularly with a nuclear power. And Russia is the largest nuclear power from the standpoint of nuclear warheads in the world, larger than even the United States, though it's a more outdated technology of what they have. You better have a clear idea of what comes next. The Carter administration really mismanaged regime change with the Shah of Iran, which brought in the Ayatollah and this whole nightmare that we're confronting with Iran's nuclear weapons development. Same thing, mistake was made in Nicaragua, where they undermined Somoza over human rights concerns, and we end up getting the Sandinista communist regime, which actually invited Soviet and Cuban presence right in the middle of our own hemisphere, and sparked, a war in that country and a lot of security concerns reminiscent of the Cuban Missile Crisis. So I feel that on the issue of unrest within Russia and turning the country against the government is risky, and I don't believe it's going to create the incentive for Putin to negotiate. And the other thing we're just not focusing enough on is that, the points that Putin's laid out, even though I'm not agreeable to them, he's got a clear settlement proposal. Now there's this issue of will he follow through, violate them, and clearly the history, as China does as well, violating just about everything they sign. But I think, at this point, we want to kind of encourage those negotiations and get the Russian troops out of there. I don't, for the life of me, I cannot explain, and I have not heard a competent explanation of why you would be why Putin would be brutally and consciously attacking civilian targets it's creating a refugee crisis, which, one thesis is that's been part of the global designs since the Biden administration began, and it manifested in Afghanistan. And I think you got to go back, look, where was the beginning of Putin believing that he could safely, conduct an invasion of Ukraine after he, didn't attempt to do it for 4 years under Trump, despite the fact that we were providing Ukraine with lethal weapons then. It had to come from watching the August 15th fall of Kabul and the complete handing off of that country to the Taliban. And I don't even want to say it was mismanagement, because it certainly looked like, to me, it was calculated.
Okay, as a strategic military location for the United States in the Western Pacific, Taiwan's ability to defend itself against Chinese invasions become particularly important. Currently, Taiwan's Air Forces only maintains fleets of F-16V Mirage 2000 and FCK-1 Jingguohao fighter jets, which will have difficulty taking off if the country's runways are damaged by missiles. All of those jets require long runs for takeoff and landing. The F-35A or F-35B fighters currently manufactured by the United States can take off and land vertically or from short distances, but Taiwan has not been able to acquire those weapon systems. The Taiwanese government stand is that the United States is not willing to sell us F-35 series. What do you think?
What motivates it?
Yeah.
Well, this is the next generation of the F-16. It's an incredible fighter jet. In the case of the B, it's got like a vertical lift capability, whereas you correctly point out, it really doesn't need the longevity of long airstrips or even the modestly short ones that F-16s function on. And we have provided this new generation of fighter jets to a number of strategic allies, including Japan, I believe. There's several thousand of them that are in production over the next 15 years. And the only reason that you wouldn't provide them to Taiwan would be this ongoing debate. Is it perceived to be provocative, or is it used as an excuse by Xi Jinping to launch military aggression? If you go back to my earlier statement that he says he's going to move and act, and it's only a question of when and how, then logically, if that's true, which I believe it is, and you take him at his word, you want to give Taiwan all military capabilities, absent nuclear weapons, but all nuclear capabilities that would be a deterrent to their military aggression. There's other things we can do also in the South China Sea. I mean, we've sort of allowed China to go ahead with, all of these illegal seizures of parts of that sea, the creation of these islands. If you recall, when they first started creating these islands in South China Sea, I was one of only not a lot of Americans, but one American who said, "You better not be planning on militarizing those islands in the South China Sea." And the response from the CCP spokesperson in Beijing to my concerns and others was, "Oh no, you have nothing to worry about. We will not militarize those islands." Now, as recently as last week, 3 of those manufactured islands have been designated by the United States as being militarized with anti-aircraft capability, proactive, aggressive, military airstrips, and other technology that could be utilized in attacks on Taiwan or other South China Sea territories or countries.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything you want to say to the people in Ukraine?
Well, I mean, I think we in the United States, like I think most of the world, are impressed with the resilience that they have shown in this aggression. And, you can see in the case of the response and the magnitude of military and other support that we're providing, that we are doing our best to push Russian forces out or force them into the negotiating, to pursue the negotiations. They are pursuing the negotiations, but, to pursue those in good faith. And to do all of that without escalating this in World War III. And I realize that sounds maybe extreme or not possible, but it is possible. And in a nuclear age, with the United States continuing to be the major nuclear power of the world, the presence of, say, a no-fly zone, which it sounds, I think, to a lay person as being appealing. Why would you not do well? A no-fly zone, let's just kind of cut through the, it's kind of a euphemism for warfare, and it would include the United States shooting down Russian fighter jets, and that would be a declaration of war. On the other hand, you could argue that the sanctions that we've just put on central banks, this is very unprecedented, the magnitude of these sanctions. I haven't seen this magnitude of sanctions really, and I believe they would be equally suitable to be placed on the CCP based on what they're doing to the Uyghurs and what they did in Hong Kong with the violation of the 50-year agreement.
What about people in Taiwan?
To the people of Taiwan, unity, cohesiveness, patriotism is immensely important. The United States, even though we're going through a challenging political moment ourselves, continues to be, and I realize that this is that China wants you to believe otherwise. They're broadcasting this all over the world. They're saying it every day. They want you to believe that we no longer have the spine or the backbone to lead in the world. That continues to be untrue. The United States is the largest economy in the world. We're far and away the most powerful military in the world. And our recognition of Taiwan's importance in its independence and in the bilateral relationship that we have, complicated as it is, continues to be one that cannot be compromised. And there are those of us, myself included, who will, certainly making that, entirely clear. And I don't see, encouragingly, any sign in the Biden administration so far, as it relates to their defense authorizations, as it relates to the defense commitments we've made to Taiwan, any sign of the weakness that I thought we saw, say, in Afghanistan. So I think there is fortitude there. I think you saw the reinforcement of some of the agreements that we've had, reinforcing the Taiwan Security Act and other agreements that are in principle effective. But let's be honest. I mean, when the rubber hits the road, agreements are agreements, and it's going to take fortitude. And so my message to Taiwan is maintain good you have the good fortune of having being surrounded by a lot of friends and allies. Japan, South Korea, Philippines, all these countries irritated with India, with the CCP's aggression in the region, and you have a lot of reason for optimism. As much as I do support that phraseology of keeping the people on alert, and especially to the younger people of Taiwan. Look, there's been having been in Taiwan in the late 80s, and I have seen a shift where, and I've seen it in other nationalities as well. I've seen it in Cuban Americans, where older Cubans wanted to return to a free Cuba. Don't give up the aspirations of the defense of first and foremost, the defense of freedom and independence of Taiwan, but also the ultimate aspiration of a free mainland. I mean, these provinces, name one of them. I mean, there's 23, I believe. Name one of those provinces that, given the option, were given, you know, a vote on separation, wouldn't leave right now. It's like the former Soviet Union in 1990, a year before its collapse, where you had, you know, really an artificial empire. And there's no unifying force. It's not a political force. It's not a linguistic force. It's not a religious force. This is a unelected, tyrannical regime suppressing, you know, all of the rights of these individual provinces. And like I said, it's being done by a very small number of people in almost a mob-like, criminal-like manner.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you so much. Have a good one. Thank you.
You too.